How y'all doing? Welcome. Regardless of whatever time zone you're in, we're certainly glad you're here. My name's Ken Gonzalez, and I'm your guide for the Americas portion of this session today as part of TFT13. Joining me today is a gentleman that I'm sure most of you know, Mr. George Spalding. George, would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Ken, hi, George Spalding here. I'm the Executive VP of and very pleased to be part of TFT13, the Americas portion. And looking forward to hearing from Matt Hooper, vigilant guy. And what are you going to talk about, Matt?
I am going to talk about IT service management versus IT engagement management, and how service management has its place, but the engagement, the business and engaging the end customers is really where IT needs to kind of start focusing. So it's kind of a little bit ITSM 3.0.
Okay,
good.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so during the course of today's session, we're going to be monitoring TweetDeck and all the other social tools we have. So if you want to tweet questions or comments, please use the TFT13 hashtag. We'll be tracking those. And then we'll get right into it with Mr. Hooper. He's a gentleman which is probably known to most of you as Hoop, for those of you that are pay attention to the ITSM Weekly podcast series and one of the Three Musketeers. He's currently the head honcho at Acorio. He's a true business and ITSM leader, and very pleased to be able to call him both a friend and an associate. So without further ado, Matt, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken, for that warm introduction. So I will share my screen here and get this thing rolling. And hopefully this works. Gotta love Google Hangout. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm very excited to be part of TFT13, my second go-around here at TFT. So I'm excited to share this presentation with you. This is going to be a little bit different than my last presentation on TFT. My last TFT had some trends, had some data, talked about the changing state of IT. I really wanted to talk particularly about this one, this presentation around IT service management, and a little bit about the mindset that I'm seeing some of the organizations get sucked into. I'm really excited to see that, ITIL has almost become, kind of expected in organizations, and that's pretty awesome. And I'm really excited to see that, more and more CIOs and IT organizations understand what ITSM is and what it could be for their organizations. However, I'm seeing a lot of mistakes starting to happen. As with any type of maturity, I'm seeing that some organizations are starting to fall into a transactional mindset. And I'm a little bit concerned with this because IT really has the opportunity to be a partner to the business. It has the opportunity to be a business driver, and organizations that have embraced technology and the information layer within inside their organization have proven to be successful and sustainable. But ITSM in and of itself is starting to counteract some of that capability. And so I thought it would be appropriate to kind of look at the ways that, this level of thinking skews the way that IT actually perceives themselves. So jump right into it, we're still seeing IT act and think like an outsider. So if anybody's familiar with the American cult movie, The Outsiders, it was a talented bunch of young folks who were disadvantaged and underprivileged, and treated and acted like they were victims. And unfortunately, this led to this kind of mindset that they were outsiders, they were treated like outsiders, they thought that, the socials always had the benefit of the doubt and that they weren't given the same perspective. And this kind of mentality is starting to creep up more and more inside of IT. I would say even more than before ITSM became this general concept that people started to appreciate, that we could be managed in a better way, we could be controlled in a better way in IT to actually start delivering business value. I'm starting to see that organizations sometimes are starting to have this victim mentality. And this manifests itself in a couple different ways. Victims, they don't believe that they can change their circumstances. And in my interaction with many folks in IT and talking to them, if you speak to them, they'll tell you things aren't going to change here. This is the way it's always been. And that's a bit of that victim mentality. Another victim mentality is that we can't prevent our outcomes. And while IT tries to be transformational, and there's a lot of activity and a lot of spend and a lot of talk around transformation of IT, in reality what they do is they view things like taking a physical server and putting it virtual as a way to make themselves transformed. And that's not what transformation is. You know, transformation is a fully social impact change to the culture, the way they perceive themselves, how they operate, who they believe they are, and that dictates to who they could be. And really, you know, victim mentality has no place in an organization like IT that truly underpins the sustainability and viability of a business. But unfortunately, some of the language that we see in service management, it almost works towards that. If I was to read for you, for instance, the definition of outcome-based service definition, this is taken from the Service Strategy book, version 3 of ITIL. It says outcome-based service definition of services ensure that offered services are those which increase customer value, meet customer needs via utility and warranty, and reduce the customer risk and cost through provisioning of services by the service provider. And herein lies the issue. If we start to separate ourselves with this type of mentality, it does put us in a position where we are saying that we're different from the rest of the organization. We're providing a service, we're managing services provided to the business, as opposed to managing outcomes of the business itself. Another aspect that I'm seeing inside of IT is that it still continues to be invisible in the conversations that truly matter. IT says it wants to have a seat at the table. It says it wants to be there and change the way the dynamic happens inside of IT, but the reality is that when it comes to business innovation and business strategy and business success, IT is frequently missing. Now, some organizations are doing a fairly good job at this. If you've yet to see some of the work from Kim Stevenson, the CIO of Intel, I highly encourage you to reflect on her work. I had the honor and privilege of doing her annual performance report moderation, and she outlined the ways in which she has transformed Intel as IT and continues to provide direct access for IT to all the lines of business, and is promoting IT as more of a discipline and a capability than as a department. And I think that's a fundamental change that we need to see with inside of IT's mentality. So let me break this down a little bit and see what I think is clear for us to look at from an IT perspective. IT service management versus IT engagement management reflects to me this way. If I were to ask you, does ITSM really focus on end customer outcomes? You would say to me, Matt, I want it to, but the reality is it typically reflects on IT's ability to provide services. And from a capabilities and resource perspective, we understand that and we try to govern and control that. But it equates to this type of scenario where servicing responds more to requests. And if you're fulfilling requests, then basically what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a position where you are working on behalf of the benefactor. IT is not directly accountable to the benefactor, nor rewarded from the benefit of that capability that we're providing to the business. So it's already disconnecting itself. It manages queues. And the problem with managing queues is that you're looking at it from a resource perspective rather than a strategic outcome. And if you're only managing queues and you're not focused on strategic outcomes, then our ability to have a place at a board, even if it's a change advisory board, from a help desk position, we're looked at as, well, what kind of value could you really handle except what impact on load we're going to have on you? And again, that's putting them in a disadvantaged state. And we work and operate in that disadvantaged state when we're looking at services from a managing a queue perspective. And also, too, servicing tells others what they do. See, we're not strategic in our thinking. We dictate to others what we do. We have a defined set of services that we're willing to claim that we support and deliver. However, it's really not focused on necessarily what the business outcome should be and can be. Now, let's compare that to engaging. See, engagement works differently. If you're not a service provider, but you're actually a partner in the delivery of the outcome, you think about things in different terms. For instance, you might say, hey, this capabilities that we can provide by putting a new portal in place for employees to have self-service that could eliminate some of their paper requests. It may eliminate some of the calls that kind of come in to, say, for instance, HR as a service provider, as a partner in the business. And we would look at that and say to the HR team and to other stakeholders, can you tell me what the cost of this business is? Could you tell me what the pain would be eliminated? See, we're engaging in a dialogue where now they have ownership, and we're bringing something to the table to them, as opposed to them asking, well, what would it cost to put up a self-service portal? And a simple changing of that dialogue happens when we perceive ourselves differently, when we're empowered. But if we wait for us to be empowered by the business, we never will be if we view ourselves as separate from the business. And some of that, again, may translate to the way that we're managing capabilities. See, if we're managing capabilities to just what our fulfillment capabilities are, how many tickets can we resolve, instead of saying that we need 3 more tier 1 support reps versus who can respond to issues within 15 minutes, versus in saying, hey, if we went out there and we actually auto-provision procurement for hardware and auto-provision procurement for software delivery, three more bodies who are responding to your issues? Or would you rather have the ability for them to achieve better outcomes? So I thought for a second I might have dropped off with Google+. And then lastly, too, when you're engaging, you're not telling others what you do, but you're having a dialogue, or you're starting that dialogue. We don't say when we're talking about engagement, these are our service windows, these are our support hours, this is what our capability is. We look at it from the perspective that, these are the things that are driving, new capabilities within the marketplace. So we discussed the capabilities of releasing to potentially user segments that are low risk with a rapid release cycle. So instead of saying to the business, we can only deploy, new code 3 times a year during these time periods, we're saying to the business, hey, where is the lowest risk in your business? Where can we have more rapid iterative releases that are going to let those customers tell us we're hitting the mark or missing the mark, interjecting issues or not interjecting issues? It's a higher level of engagement, actually brings the business to the table to say, where's the level of accountability and what are they supporting? See, because ultimately, if we continue along this IT service management trend that I'm seeing, which is that we are focused around command and control, we're focused around metrics, we're focused around repeatable requests that happen in the organization, we're looking for ways to automate those workflows and automate those requests without human interaction. If we're looking for ways to increase knowledge at a more enterprise level where people don't have to think, but it tells them exactly what they need to do, ultimately what we start to become is just mindless orders takers. And we look at it that perspective, again, that positions IT in a disadvantaged state that I don't think they should be put in. I think, we have an opportunity here with IT to bring to the table new and creative ways in which businesses can operate on a global scale, which we can capitalize on our human capital, and we can take things to the new level with technology from a social, geographical-based, mobile-based, all these new types of technology interactions that we're having to increase the user experience and increase the value proposition to the business. However, organizations, when they look at IT who says, hey, I want to be innovative and I want to do these things for you, they look and say, well, you know what, our organization is filled with opportunities to fulfill requests. But if you're going to bring in that ITSM stuff that is basically focused on taking your people who are creative and dynamic and we actually appreciated their firefighting capability and make them mindless zombies, I'm not sure that I want to do that to my people. So I think that's worthy of reflection. We should stop and think about that when we're trying to optimize to a certain level. So let's take a look at service management. I'm not saying that service management doesn't have its place in the enterprise. Of course it does. And I'm a fan. But in reality, it's still reactive in nature. It waits for things to happen before it starts to put actions in place. It's process-driven, right? It focuses on optimization of resources A fundamental principle is how do we take the higher level architects, capture their knowledge, automate their business productivity, and put it to either the low cost help desk staff or completely automate it through workflows and automation capabilities. Right? It works within a set boundaries. We consistently talk about the service catalog and the scope of managed services that we're providing. It's concerned about tasks, not necessarily outcomes, and we try to say that it does concern itself with outcomes, and maybe some organizations are doing a better job. But at the end of the day, it's really about closing a ticket, or it's about fulfilling a change. It's about releasing it with a certain level of quality. And very rarely do we get to the level of outcome that we need to be focused on. And in that regard, we overstate our internal value just way too much. We talk about our services. Hey, we're able to close 16 tickets, first call resolution, and reduce our response time by 3.5 minutes. And it's those type of internal metrics that we're excited about. And of course, it helps us to manage, but then again, that's the point, right? It's not really focused on that level of engagement. And thus, we get really excited to fulfill these things in a rapid fashion. And unfortunately, it ultimately makes us focused on our metrics and promoting those metrics rather than the true benefits. So let's break these down just a little bit. If we were to look at this again, IT service management in almost all of its aspects is completely reactive, right? If you have an issue, call the help desk. If you have a need, go to the self-service portal. If you have a question, go to the knowledge base. It's completely reactive to the need, wants, desire, fulfillment-based initiative of a particular end user. And sometimes that's just too late. The other thing I think it is important to realize is, we sometimes value driving costs down, and we'll promote that as a capability within IT or something that should be perceived as valuable. And that's not always the case. To many consumers of a service or consumers of an outcome, they're not particularly impressed or want to be reminded that necessarily what they just experienced was a low-cost service or provided by a low-cost resource. So we have to be careful about that from a service management perspective. And we want to position those things appropriately and really make sure that we're still really have our eyes on the value that we need to have it on. Again, when it comes to defining our services in certain boundaries, if we're acting like this train station or this bus service that says, there's no service northbound, southbound, also bus services have been severely disrupted. In fact, walking is probably your only option. That's not the way that we want to operate. But unfortunately, with inside of service management, a lot of it is scope. What is managed? What does our service catalog say these services are? What's outside the areas of support? And thus, we're not effectively engaging the customer that we need to. Another point that happens too is that we can sometimes be so focused on fulfilling requests that we get overeager to provide a capability, and we'll actually do something really stupid. And this is a complete fail on the part of IT when there's so much rigor there and so much control that it doesn't have the flexibility it needs to for IT to kind of be creative and engage on a wider scale, that they will actually go outside the boundaries and actually introduce more risk. We have to remember that managed risk means that we are wildly realistic about our present circumstances, but wildly unrealistic about the future. And so our eagerness to get a task done or accomplish something may sometimes completely violate a protection that's in place from a business standpoint. And again, if we're not engaged and we don't understand why that protection's in place, we're not enabling the people to support in a more creative fashion. Let's talk about, too, also the capabilities that we're providing and how we manage ourselves. I think the service catalog is a perfect example of failure to engage, but success to manage. Service catalogs have proven themselves to be very effective in driving users from calling or emailing the service desk to go being self-reliant. And that's great. That's great from a management perspective. But when you look at a lot of the service catalogs that are out there, they're still very limited and they're very IT focused. We see things like access management or network device management as part of the listing of services. And this makes no sense to the business, but IT gets very excited about it. You know, they tout, oh, look at all these different services that we have. But reality is we might be sending the wrong message. Right? So as we think that we're offering something that's of value to the business user, but the reality is that we might not be. And because we're not talking to them and we're not having that interaction anymore, and it's all done through just digital communications, we're losing that touch point. We're losing, you know, what they're thinking about, and we're losing, you know, how we want to be perceived. You know, one of the big failure points I see again and again is just email. You know, email is a service. It's not a service. It's a system. It's a system that is heavily utilized throughout the enterprise, and it promotes business-to-business communications. You know, but we have this as listed as a service. We're sending the wrong message about what IT is focused on, the services that we offer and are delivered. And then another point, too, is that when we look at how quickly we're gearing ourselves up to provide services and capabilities, you know, we're all about speed to fulfillment, speed to delivery. Fulfillment is great, but it can be a brief and disconnected experience. And if we don't take the time to fully understand, well, why did you request that? Or what was your reasonings for asking for that service or that capability? We're going to lose the ability to get ahead of the wave, to get ahead of the curve and start thinking about what the business might be needing and what end customers could be desiring. And again, we lose that touch point. That disconnection ultimately will make us irrelevant, and that's a concern. So we may be failing to engage in that dialogue that keeps us in the relationship. And then again, too, you know, when it comes to our policies and the way that we communicate our capabilities, we may tout again that first call resolution is up to 80%, right? Well, that's great. But the reality is did we educate the help desk on the bugs that we're going to release? So in essence, what we did is we pushed out bad code, but we increased the first call resolution rate by telling them these aren't going to be fixed. So if someone calls about it, just go ahead and let them know it's not fixed. It'll be fixed in the next release. That closes the issue at the first tier, but that is not a level of business outcome, and that has no sense of accountability to the actual the business results. And so what we think is a protection or benefit actually is not, and it's masking that benefit. And this is what I meant by that term, you know, masking the benefits through our metrics. You know, we have to be careful of that. If we're not engaged with our business, we'll lose that touch point. So service engagement, where does it differ? Service engagement is more proactive, right? It learns about the end customer's appetite and it gets ahead of the curve. It focuses on getting stakeholders involved. They're not asking things of us. We're jointly bringing things to the table, and it's built on our trust and our ability to support over time. So as many CIOs you might have heard from have said time and time again who have been successful in getting a seat at the table and having these engaged dialogues, you have to have your house in order. So if your IT service management is not focused on engagement internally to IT and perceived as one who engages different other, engages other service providers and is more flexible and agile, no one's going to listen to you. No one's going to say, okay, well, that request management tool, using your help desk software to now take HR requests, for instance, and do onboarding, or do facilities, or do legal, or do general ledger, which is what we all want to get to. If we don't have that cleaned up in-house first, no one's going to trust us. And if we're only focused on outcomes, on penalties and not outcomes, then people are going to say, well, you're just driven by service levels. In fact, you're bonused by service levels. You're not really aligned with our vision. And so thus we have to, from an engagement standpoint, show that we're committed, even if we're the underdog in the fight, that we value true value, the end customer value, and we'll stand our ground. And lastly, we'll deal with realities. So let's take these in one at a time, right? What does it mean? If you're engaged, you're not passive. You're not managing. You're not dictating. You're truly committed. You're willing to go out on a limb. You're willing to jump out there and take the time it takes, even if it means that you might get your hand bitten off. All right. So the last point on the hand bitten off is that we are fully engaged. We're willing to take the business risk, but we're also willing, and we fully recognize the thrill of success. Right, taking a new market, bringing on a new customer line. These are the things that we get excited about. we're willing to accept that victory as well as risk defeat. When it comes to also the ability to go out and provide new capabilities, we understand what it takes to bring the stakeholder to the table. We will bring them right into the fold. We're not going to let them sit on the sideline, but we're going to make them part of the action. So we're accepting new philosophies like Agile that gets them quickly involved with what the outcome is going to be. We experience new capabilities like DevOps, which gets the developers pushing code to production, because if it breaks, they're going to get woken up at 2 in the morning. These are the new level of experiences that we're pushing across the organization to keep everybody actively engaged.
Hey, Matt?
Yep.
Don't forget to share your screen.
Okay. So keeping our stakeholders actively involved is exceptionally important. Another key thing when it comes to engagement is we trust our support systems. We trust that our service desk has the best intentions of the end users in mind. We trust that our release management team has the best intentions to make sure that they're not breaking things. We trust that our architects are doing good due diligence in moving that ball forward on a change. And thus we're able to engage in more healthy dialogue. We're able to engage each other in what the risks truly are. And thus we're willing to take those risks, knowing that we've got the right levels of protection in place. And this changes our dynamic of what we view as the services we're going to support. So if someone says something that's out of our support or not in our service catalog, we're not worried about that. We're willing to take that risk. We're willing to go to the next level because we trust our protections. We're committed, and we understand the benefit of actually taking that risk. What does this ultimately do? This starts to show that we really value value, right? We understand that what we're bringing to the table is a little bit different. And if we're customizing it and making it your way, we're ready to start putting a price on that. We're ready to start showing that we represent the value that we're offering. In an engaged dialogue, we understand how people react to it, and we're willing to adjust accordingly, obviously, but we're also willing to stand our ground. And I think that's an important point. See, when you're engaged, you're not afraid of the fight. And I feel that, like in IT service management, we're sometimes afraid of the fight because that victim mentality kicks in and we don't want to go and take on this new challenge and it's bigger than us, or it's been something that's been a challenge before and we haven't yet got over it. But we're engaged. We're committed. We know, well, we might get pinned down, but we're going to learn from this. We're willing to take this thing to the mat. And lastly, on engagement too, we don't feel like it's a problem to keep it real, right? We'll have the honesty of a child to go out there and to observe things like a child, but we'll act like an adult. We'll be assertive, we'll put things on the table, we'll engage in healthy dialogue, and we'll let them know from a marketing standpoint, hey, the way that you're pushing that campaign, it's really not resonating with the market. Look at the metrics, or having that dialogue that shows you're not doing what you need to do to take this to the professional level, or this doesn't represent our culture. You're feeling empowered to have those candid discussions. You're not worried about the pushback or the negativity that might come with that. I think that's really important when we talk about engagement, because it is a back and forth. It is a healthy dialogue. It's working through those dysfunctions that you might be going through. So, few failing points that I think IT service management and us in the space have pushed that are not the appropriate ways to handle things. Policies, surveys, and communication. So let's walk through a couple of those. Our policies. IT's policies typically are failures. They don't communicate clearly. We say that we can't have access to a system, but sure enough, there's a bunch of people who have access to that system. And as a business user, I can't have access to that system, but someone on the network team could have access to that system. It's these type of conflicting policies that are not really holding weight from a trust level. And thus, they're confusing. They're sending the wrong message. They're not building that trust that's needed for true engagement. We need to state our policies in terms of reasons why. We also need to make sure that any type of impact from the policy is fair. I mean, the breach of policy on many things is not nearly as severe as the IT will perceive them. I've been in many meetings where I hear a change manager say, well, we can't do that, that violates SOX, and we'd be fined millions of dollars. Or you can't use that laptop because you're going to breach HIPAA compliance and will be fined millions of dollars. You know, the reality is that you take a close look at the circumstances. There could be a fine, there might be something, but it's not millions of dollars. You know, be reasonable in the way that you set your policies, and be accurate in the way that you state the impact or the the penalty that comes with a violation of that policy. Otherwise, you just become the cry wolf person who has no credibility. Let's talk about surveys for a second. You know, surveys is another one where we feel like we're empowered by asking other people questions, but no one really wants to be asked questions. We're all so busy, we don't necessarily have time to fill out forms. Where on the other hand, we're engaged. If you were to call me or ask me something on Twitter or send me a note, I'd be probably much more inclined to do something like that. In fact, if you asked me to do a Google Hangout, I'd probably be more inclined to do a Google Hangout with you than to fill out a form. And I know that makes it unstructured and makes it more difficult for you, but the reality is if these surveys are for your benefit, they make it easy. You know, one of the cool things I think we see is when people take a ticket and they send a quick text message, was that a great experience or poor experience? Hit 1 for yes and 2 for no in your reply. You know, those kind of really easy, streamlined ways are super innovative and can take surveys to the next level. We can get that feedback, but we're not doing it in an intrusive way, right? And don't offer things that are of no value, right? If you fill this survey out, you'll get a free report. Seriously? That's not going to motivate anybody. Or from an internal perspective, if you fill this survey out, I don't know what you could offer me, right? A day off from work. I mean, that's not. What is it really telling me? You know, make it something valuable to them. You know, improve what you're offering, because otherwise you're not incenting them to give you the information. And if the persons aren't incented in the right way, the people who are going to fill out those surveys, well, what value is that data at the end of the day? And then lastly, be careful about what you ask and when you ask for it. I think the reality is that we feel that sometimes we need to collect that information. We need to know, what our end customers are thinking, or we need to think what our business partners are thinking. We need to get a good understanding of it. If you're still at the stage of sending out these surveys on every third ticket or every first, some people are still doing it on every ticket, it's just intrusive. It's not really going to give you the benefit that you're looking for. Open up dialogue. Have healthy debates. Have conference rooms booked off to engage people, or do open Google Plus Hangouts or things like that. Really start thinking outside the box in the way that you can engage your customers, and this will show that you're truly genuine in the way that you want to hear from them and react to their issues. Let's face it, for a long time the business as a whole has been coming to IT and saying, hey, can you do this, can you do that? And IT says, yeah, we can do that, we can do this, or no, we can't do that. But overall, it hasn't really shown a true keen interest on the business outcomes. So if we're serious about that, if we're really focused on being genuine, we need to make that real. We need to show that we are sincere. We need to show some techno-empathy, so we're using the right levels of technology to engage our end customers and have that dialogue with them. So this brings us to communication. The way we communicate reflects on the way that we view others. Right? So this starts in a whole lot of areas, and I'll beat up on the service catalog again. When you look at most service catalogs, I've seen the ones touted, time and time again as, oh, listen, we went out and we saw this university's service catalog and it was perfect and we're going to use it. And you go and you look at it, and again, it's full of, reset my password and network device management and all these other types of technical jargon. The more winning service catalogs, the one that really appeal to people is when they speak in their language. If you're trying to provide communication, or you're trying to provide instruction, or you're trying to help people understand outcomes or penalties or circumstances or risks, you have to speak to it in language that they can understand. And I think that's vitally important. We also have to think about the timing of our communication. When it comes to our communication, if we go out there and we put some kind of communication out, and then we have people call up the service desk and they have a terrible experience, I'm about to hang up the phone and say, oh, well, before you go, can you fill out this survey? Or can I get a quote from you? It's poorly timed communication, right? We have to think about how we're disseminating information. Are we going to the right channels? Are we making it easy for people to see what's happening in the environment? If we're going to take out their service, are we just using email? Well, we know none of us get through all of our emails. So are we automating phone calls? Are we automating text messages? Are we using social communications? Yeah. These are ways that will help us with our timing. We have to be really careful about what we say and when we say it. Constant failure in communication is that it's not so much what we say, but how we say it and how it's communicated in context. So I think that's an issue that we really, really want to be careful of. And then we also have to think about the limitations of others. We may feel that we're providing a proper level of instruction. And from our services standpoint, from our service management standpoint, we may look at our metrics and say, oh, look how much adoption we've had on our service catalog. But the reality is if we go back and we had a true level of engagement and we did some user experience testing, or if we did some kind of focus groups, we may find that many people were confused, or many people didn't have the technical abilities to operate that service catalog. Or many of them tried it on their mobile phone and the service catalog's not supported on their mobile devices. So that, again, that's a failure to understand their limitations, whether technical, skill set, or in other ways, what was the issue that they were facing. So again, being disconnected can have an issue if we're not engaged. And lastly is looking at it from the customer's eyes. Look at it from the end user's eyes, end customer's eyes. What is it that we are trying to say? And frequently in IT, when we look at the communication, email outage sent via email. It doesn't make any sense, and we look like fools. Yeah, we were trying to impart knowledge, or trying to impart value, but the reality is the message we are sending is just wrong. And lastly, the way that we operate needs to be clearly communicated. I look at, I just can't help but pick on service catalogs. I look at service catalogs and I see these requests for fulfillment and requests for issues. But yet it's never really clear to me, are you handling this as a request for fulfillment? And is it automated? Will I ever get to a human? Or do you understand that this is an important issue to me and that you're resolving it? See, if we don't draw that clear line to help people understand, listen, we're operating under these conditions. We're engaging you as if this was an issue. We're engaging you as if this was a request. And here's how we do that. And here's how we fulfill that request. Or here's how we handle that issue. So clarity on what you take from a customer and what you give to that customer is vitally important. Again, I'm using the term customer as the end customer for your business. And however that may translate through the business as a whole, think about those layers of translation. And lastly, the people that you put on the team to go out and resolve those issues, make sure that they understand what engagement truly means. The point here is that there is a place for service management. There is a place for rigid controls, governance, focusing on repeatable actions and automating them, looking to drive through process metrics more efficiencies or better data capture. But in a lot of ways, we do not want to lose the ability for IT to engaging the business and engaging the end customer. We have to recognize this as a powerful opportunity. If we don't, marketing will. And I think that's a huge mistake. Marketing is so focused now on this engagement kick. But they're sales driven, right? They're extraction driven. They're extraction from a revenue standpoint driven, typically. And what IT has the opportunity to be an extraction from an opportunity standpoint. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us to get out ahead. So again, engagement rules, Clear communications and outcome. Don't treat this as a one-time event and show solid commitment. So we have room for both. We have the opportunity here for service management. I feel that that opportunity is mostly structured around IT operations. IT operations has repeatable conduct that they can consistently focus on to drive efficiencies. It's around first-tier support, where you may have to use structures such as standard in case, that IT Skeptic and Matt Barron talked about today. And around that, first-tier support too, where they need to take certain actions to do resolution. Okay, there's great places for service management. But outside of that, and if we look at kind of back to the idle diagram where there's some overlap between infrastructure management and application management into operations, look on the outside of that box. That's where we need to have service engagement. That's where our enterprise architects need to be looking at new and innovative technologies and finding use cases and building better stories to bring to market. This is where our infrastructure architects can look at new and better ways to provision elastic services for network storage, internet, that's going to enable them for better capabilities. This is where we can have better stories around our application and UI designers to go out there and take new markets and build new opportunities by being engaged. And a lot of that just starts from delivering a better experience. If we're focused on what truly drives our business, the culture that we have, and the brand that we're supporting, we'll do a much better job at increasing our value and having a seat at the table. When you look statistically at those people who are providing services at Starbucks versus McDonald's per se, they can both deliver a cup of coffee. One's paid a whole lot more and getting a higher price extracted for it. Again, that's because of the experience they're delivering. So think about service management versus service engagement. Think about how we can engage our customers and how we can truly understand what they're looking for and what's appealing to them. I think ultimately this will help us to continually challenge how ITSM is growing, maturing, how we're structuring it, and how we're sharing information and building these best practices. Thank you very much.
Well, Matt, great job. I have to tell you, it was probably one of the best uses of graphics that I've seen in quite a long time. The way you picked out the signs, and it certainly gave you a lot to talk about and have it themed to the topic. A brilliant job of spinning it together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I feel myself sometimes being sucked back into my old way of thinking, and I really can't contribute any more value to my mindset today than having and running my own startup. When I read Eric Ries's Lean Startup book and I learned about those pivot points and feedback loops, I really reflected very strongly on all the different IT projects I've ran over my 20 plus years in IT and how we just didn't build those feedback loops in place. And it reminds me very much of Gene Kim's Project Phoenix, where when Bill finally came to the realization that he had the ear of the finance guy and the ear in the heat vision from the marketing person. It may not have been a strong relationship, but let me tell you, he was engaged, right? And you can't always build friends, but you can always build dialogue. And I think that's something in the enterprise that we need to get more confident about. And it's hard. I feel for IT being beat up so much. And it's, but I think the opportunity is now for us to change the level of engagement we have.
Dig it.
So, I've got a question for you, Matt. Because one of the things that I've always felt was that ITIL and ITSM was really the blocking and tackling, was the basics of IT, was like the foundational elements of IT. And many of the things making kind of reinforced that to me, where you were basically saying, look, this stuff is the basic stuff here. Come on. There's more to this. But I guess the real question that I want to know is, do you believe that we can engage before we do some of those basics, or do we have to have those basics in place? Basic good change management, basic incident management, that kind of stuff, before we can become agile or flexible, etc. I'm interested to hear your take on that.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question, George. You know, I think it comes to anything, right? At the end of the day, people work with people and people buy from people, and whether it's cash exchange or it's just mindset or, you know, I'm buying into your vision, at the end of the day, it's reputational awareness. And if you're a new CEO or a new CIO and you've got just this stellar reputation and you've proven it in another organization, I don't think you necessarily have to get all that blocking and tackling in place before you start this high level of engagement and innovative controls. But that, you know, that trust, that, you know, jumping off that bridge with that bungee cord, you know, to me, just it really resonates with me. How much do I feel people have my back? How much do I trust that someone actually tested this cord and tied it off on the bridge? Because I'm taking a leap of faith. And I'm going to go out there and talk about new capabilities. And if I feel that IT is going to keep failing in their releases, never get to that virtual stack, never make this elastic, never get to the point where they can have a change advisory board meeting that doesn't take 4 hours, then I'm going to continue to retract my willingness to take risks. And I'm going to lessen my level of engagement. So it really needs to be, there. I look at, you know, Karen Ferris does a phenomenal job in her you know, balanced diversity mindset, you know, talking about innovation versus fulfillment. And I look at it as, you know, you can have mindless innovation. You know, when we look at our service desk reps today who work from home on their tablets, fulfilling orders over voice over IP, that's exceptional innovation. But it's got commoditized to the point of mindlessness, which is okay because that now lets us take things to the next level. It's the Deming's improvement model where we're continuing to build the base of foundation. But if our house is not stable, it doesn't allow us to go out on the rim. And I mentioned Kim Stevenson in my presentation, and she's one who said this. She was not able to have the healthy dialogue until she got the house in order. It was her meeting commitments again and again and again that built that level of dialogue with her and the rest of the business units, that enabled her to have engaging conversations and push back on some of the things that they were trying to do, or push forward on some of the things that they weren't thinking about. Without reputational awareness on some of those things, she wouldn't have been able to have those healthy dialogues.
Well, and I've had discussions with CIOs where the CIO basically is saying, I can't put forth a strategic initiative because every meeting I have with the senior executives turns into the tale of help desk horror stories, right? So it's like you've got, I guess I believe, that you must have your house in order, which is what you're talking about. And by the way, that was a wonderful video with Kim Stevenson. Fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, she's great.
Oh, she's great. Yeah. Yeah, you held your own, but she's great. But it was, but you know, I just think you have to have your house in order before you can take the step off of this stuff. And I see people, my problem is, and I think your problem as well, is that people are seeing this ITSM as the end game. This is it. This is our big goal. Wow, we got it. Look at this. Look at our first call resolution. Woo, yeah. That's just the beginning. It's just this blocking and tackling. It's the jumping off point for real engagement.
I mean, this may be heresy, but you know, I say this to a lot of you know, clients that I'm meeting with now. You know, and my role in Acorio is very interesting, but you know, I actually have told several clients that they probably shouldn't do problem management. And mostly it's because they don't have categories, right, that are clear. They don't know what types of issues they're resolving. And they don't relate a single ticket to any kind of CI. So I tell them, you know, what correlation capability do you possibly have? In essence, what you're doing is opening up your incidents are really easy to fix issues, and problem management is really difficult issues to fix. And now you're managing 2 queues, trying to build 2 systems of metrics and reports, trying to optimize 2 sets of teams. And the team is very confused on, is it an incident or is it a problem, because you have not defined any kind of qualitative definition around it. And I think that kind of goes to the mindset of, you know, we're eager to get, you know, optimized, but we're not always willing to take the painful steps to get there. And when it comes back to the level of engagement that we have with end customers, a colleague at a major pharmacy said it well. He says, the day that my network prevents someone from going to a store and buying their pills is the day that I have failed the business. And when you think of it from that perspective, and it really helped me to appreciate that this individual, while he was managing network devices, and that was his role and what he got paid for, he recognized and was willing to accept the penalty and accountability that the business as a whole accepts. And to me, that's business and IT alignment. That's where you are seeing that, IT is not a separate and distinct entity. And yet when it comes to, other organizations, they still are just, doing queue management. And they're focused on, well, we weren't able to find root cause, so let's put it over in this queue. And it's just shuffling paperwork. There's no real sense and tie back to what the business is driving towards. So.
Okay, Matt. Great job. You did wonderful. For everybody out there in the audience, have a look at the timeline. Matt, have a look at the tweets. Lots of good stuff came out of what you had to talk about. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thanks, Matt. And
thanks, everybody.
We'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, George.
Introducing My IT from BMC Software. One quick download and the way your users think about IT changes forever. Let's say they need a networked printer, or a Wi-Fi connection, or even a map of an office they're visiting. My IT already knows where they are and shows them a list of available resources and services pre-configured for their devices. Or maybe your user needs help with something more complex. With My IT, they can do most things themselves. But if they can't, they can simply schedule an appointment with a technician who can. In short, My IT is built to make your IT organization more modern and your users infinitely happier, dramatically changing the perception of your services